The Ottoman Empire stretched across continents, its domes glinting under the sun, its armies feared and respected. From the outside, it was a kingdom of gold, spices, and power. The markets overflowed with silk, jewels, and fragrant perfumes. Minarets rose toward the sky, calling the faithful to prayer, while caravans carried treasures from distant lands. Diplomats from Europe and Asia whispered about its wealth and strength. To the world, it was a wonder. But none of that revealed the truth. None of it showed what lay hidden behind the walls of Topkapi Palace. Inside those walls existed a different empire, a shadow empire, invisible to the crowds in the streets, filled with secrets, schemes, and fear. The harem, often imagined by outsiders as a paradise of beauty and pleasure, was nothing of the sort. It was a machine built to protect the throne, to control the succession, and to maintain power through manipulation. Every corridor, every marble floor, every delicate lattice window held secrets of ambition, jealousy, and survival. Luxury was a mask, beauty was a weapon, and silence was the deadliest tool of all. The women who entered the harem were stripped of their pasts. A girl born in a distant village, captured in war or purchased from a market far across the empire, lost her name the moment she crossed the palace gates. She became part of a system where her value was measured in one thing: her ability to earn the sultan's favor and, most importantly, to bear a son. Nothing else mattered. History barely remembers most of them. Names vanished, lives disappeared, stories ended behind locked doors. Only fragments remained, whispers, diplomats' letters, and secret accounts that survived centuries of censorship and decay. Yet even in this world of shadows, power existed. Some women learned the rules quickly. They observed, they listened, they calculated. They formed alliances with eunuchs, courtiers, and other women. They understood that each smile, each gesture, each whispered word could shape the future of the empire. Among them, a select few would rise, becoming not just concubines, but rulers in their own right. But for every rise, another would fall. The harem was a battlefield disguised as paradise. Every day was a contest, every conversation a potential trap, every glance a test of loyalty or betrayal. The daily life inside the harem was a mix of discipline, routine, and constant tension. Some women were trained to sing, dance, or play instruments. Others were taught calligraphy, poetry, and etiquette. Every skill was weaponized, used to catch the sultan's attention or to charm a powerful courtier. Meals were lavish, but even at the table the political game continued. A shared look, a misplaced word, or an accidental stumble could mark a woman as vulnerable. Punishments for misbehavior were swift, sometimes cruel. A slip in obedience could lead to confinement, deprivation, or even death. The palace itself was a living organism of rules and threats. Every servant, every eunuch, every guard knew their place and used it to enforce the harem's invisible law. The eunuchs were perhaps the most feared inhabitants. Castrated men brought from Africa or other distant lands, they were tasked with guarding the harem and controlling its secrets. Their loyalty was absolute, or at least carefully monitored. They decided who moved through the corridors, who entered the sultan's chambers, who received messages. Some grew powerful, using information as currency. They could elevate a woman to prominence or ensure her disappearance. The women, in turn, learned to navigate these relationships carefully. A whispered secret, a hidden note, a favor exchanged at the right moment could mean survival. The harem's politics were invisible to outsiders, yet they controlled the empire's future. And then there were nights of terror, nights when the sultan's jealousy or paranoia became deadly. Sultan Ibrahim, later called the Mad, would be one of the most infamous rulers to walk these halls. Stories say that in one violent outburst, dozens of women were dragged from their rooms and thrown into the freezing waters of a palace fountain. Silk dresses clung to their bodies as they struggled silently against the icy grip. Some drowned immediately. Others disappeared into the dark, never to be seen again. The palace walls swallowed their screams. Diplomats wrote letters describing the horrors. Survivors remembered it in trembling whispers. And yet, life inside the harem continued because survival depended on endurance and cunning. Ambition burned even in the shadows of fear. A single pregnancy could change everything. One son could lift a girl from nameless slave to one of the most powerful figures in the empire. Every mother knew this. Every cradle became a battlefield. Alliances shifted, friendships formed and shattered, and trust was a dangerous gamble. Every movement, every conversation, every smile had meaning. Each woman learned to watch, to calculate, to anticipate. One wrong glance, one misplaced word, one lapse in loyalty could lead to exile or death. The contrast between Istanbul outside and the harem inside could not have been sharper. The city pulsed with life. Markets, mosques, cafes, the calls of merchants, the laughter of children, the chatter of neighbors. Outside, the empire appeared ordered and prosperous. Inside, the harem was a place where fear mixed with beauty, where power was invisible but absolute. It was a kingdom within a kingdom, where every act had consequences that could ripple through the empire itself. Yet, for all the darkness, some women thrived. They learned the machinery of power, using it to climb higher. They learned to observe, manipulate, and protect their futures. Hurrem Sultan, for example, would rise from concubine to queen. Kusum Sultan would later navigate these same halls, bending the empire to her will. Their stories were extraordinary, and yet built on the suffering and silence of countless others. For every rise, another fell. This balance of ambition and fear defined the harem across generations. Even the youngest girl entering the harem could sense the stakes. She would learn quickly. Every smile was a negotiation. Every gesture a potential betrayal. Nights were the most dangerous time. The sultan's favor could shift suddenly. The eunuchs watched everything. Secrets could be weapons. The future of the empire could rest on a single child's survival. Silence and obedience were the only shields against the deadly games unfolding behind the gilded walls. And still, the walls held more secrets than any outsider could imagine. Every marble floor, every crystal lamp, every intricate lattice window hid stories of ambition, betrayal, fear, and power. The harem was not a paradise. It was a laboratory of control. Women learned to live within it, to survive, and for some, to rise. But always the threat of death hovered. Every day, every night, every whispered word carried the weight of life or death. History barely remembers them, yet their lives shaped empires. This was the reality hidden behind the shining domes of Topkapi Palace, a gilded cage where human lives were measured in whispers and threats, a place where ambition, jealousy, and fear intertwined so tightly that the line between love and betrayal disappeared. Outside, Istanbul thrived in color, sound, and life. Inside, the harem thrived in shadows, silence, and secrets. And in these shadows, the story of power, survival, and terror had only just begun.
The harem was a maze of corridors, rooms, and hidden chambers, each holding secrets that could topple kings. Every day, new girls arrived, some from distant lands, some from noble families, others bought at markets in the Balkans or the Caucasus. Their faces were young, their eyes wide, filled with fear and wonder. None knew what awaited them. The moment they crossed the palace gates, they lost their names, their pasts, and their freedom. They became part of a system older than the empire itself, where every action could be deadly, every smile a trap. The first weeks were the most dangerous. New arrivals were observed constantly by the eunuchs, who judged their intelligence, beauty, and demeanor. Some were sent to rooms to practice singing or dancing. Others learned etiquette, calligraphy, or the art of conversation. Every lesson was a test, every gesture a potential weapon. The girls quickly realized that talent alone was not enough. Observing the movements of others, noting their alliances, and understanding the hidden rules of the palace mattered just as much. One misstep, one careless word could brand a girl for life. Yet ambition grew even in these shadows. Some girls quickly understood that survival meant more than obedience. It required strategy. They watched older concubines, noted their relationships with the eunuchs, and learned which favors were worth seeking. They whispered in quiet corners, sharing information and secrets, testing who could be trusted. In this environment, silence was as valuable as words. A carefully hidden secret could save a life or destroy one. Among these new arrivals, a few girls began to rise slowly, gaining the attention of the sultan or powerful eunuchs. Their victories were quiet at first, a favorable assignment, a room closer to the sultan's chambers, or a word passed along to the right servant. Each small gain mattered because it meant survival, and survival meant the possibility of influence. In the harem, influence could eventually turn into power, and power was the only true currency. The eunuchs were more than guards. They were the eyes, ears, and hands of the sultan inside the harem. Castrated and trained to enforce rules without hesitation, they controlled every movement. They delivered messages, monitored whispers, and reported secrets. Some eunuchs became wealthy and influential, forming silent alliances with ambitious women. Others remained silent, loyal to the palace, their loyalty often tested with bribes or threats. A well-placed favor or a carefully concealed truth could lift a woman from obscurity to prominence, while a poorly chosen word could end her life. Even in these controlled walls, rivalry and jealousy were constant. Older concubines viewed newcomers as threats. Some tried to manipulate the sultan, offering information or advice to gain favor. Others spread rumors, hoping to discredit rivals. Alliances shifted daily, and trust was rare. No one could ever be certain whether a whispered compliment was genuine or a trap. The harem functioned like a chessboard, and every move mattered. One mistake could end a life. Pregnancy was the ultimate turning point. A single child could elevate a woman to immense power. Mothers who bore sons held the potential to shape the empire itself. Their influence extended beyond the walls of the harem into politics, military appointments, and diplomatic negotiations. But every pregnancy was also a battlefield. Rival concubines might attempt to sabotage it. Poisons could be secretly administered, and subtle manipulations could decide who lived and who died. In this environment, life itself was fragile, and power came at the cost of constant vigilance. Amid these rivalries, the sultan watched. Sultan Ibrahim's mind was unpredictable. Some days he showed kindness, others he lashed out with violence, often without reason. A smile or a frown could decide the fate of a woman or even entire factions within the palace. His mood controlled the rhythm of life in the harem. Women learned to anticipate his whims, to read the smallest signs, and to protect themselves at all costs. And yet, no one could ever be fully prepared. His actions were as terrifying as they were decisive. Outside, the city of Istanbul remained unaware of the full extent of what transpired within the palace walls. Markets bustled, mosques echoed with calls to prayer, and merchants traded spices and silks. The people marveled at the empire's power and sophistication, but inside, the harem's golden floors hid a world of fear, ambition, and death. Every secret plotted behind its lattice windows, every whispered plan had the potential to reshape the empire. Some women managed to survive this deadly environment and even thrive. They learned to manipulate, to form alliances, and to read the hidden currents of palace life. Hürrem Sultan was one such figure, quietly observing and calculating her moves. Kösem Sultan, who would come later, would master these same rules, bending the empire to her will. These women understood a truth that few outside the harem could comprehend. Power was not granted, it was seized, often at a terrible cost. And yet, survival was not always enough. A single misstep, a careless word, or a lapse of judgment could result in exile or death. The harem had been designed to protect the sultan and the throne, but it also became a place where the smallest error could mean annihilation. Every step taken in these corridors was measured, every conversation weighed, and every glance considered carefully. The palace's walls absorbed every secret, every betrayal, and every act of ambition, leaving behind a history written in shadows. Even the eunuchs, powerful as they were, could not control everything. Women sometimes discovered hidden passages, secret doors, or private ways to communicate. These small victories were dangerous, but could provide an edge in the complex game of palace life. Messages smuggled to the right person, a whispered word to a powerful courtier, or a silent act of sabotage could turn the tide of fortune. In the harem, small actions had enormous consequences. The threat of Sultan Ibrahim's violence hung over everyone like a dark cloud. Tales of his unpredictable cruelty circulated among the women. Some nights, his fury would erupt in acts of terror, dragging women to their deaths or punishing entire factions within the palace. But these horrors could not prevent ambition. The women who survived learned to use fear itself as a weapon. They understood that the harem was a machine, and by mastering its rhythms, they could manipulate it to their advantage. The harem was a world of contradictions. Luxury mixed with fear. Beauty existed alongside cruelty. Power rested in silence. Every woman learned that outward appearances were meaningless. Only actions and influence mattered. The walls of the palace contained both prison and opportunity. And the lessons learned here would shape the empire itself, as these women, hidden from the world, pulled unseen strings that controlled soldiers, advisors, and even the sultan. As night fell over Topkapi, the palace transformed. The corridors darkened, shadows stretched across marble floors, and whispers filled the air. Every room held secrets, every window hid an observer. And in this darkness, ambition and fear intertwined, creating a world where survival was never guaranteed and power demanded cunning, patience, and ruthlessness. The walls of the harem had seen centuries of ambition and blood. They had absorbed the struggles, betrayals, and schemes of countless women, and they would witness many more. Because even in fear, even in silence, the game continued. The empire outside might seem ordered and grand, but within these gilded walls, power was raw, invisible, and deadly. The harem held the threads of the empire's future, and sometimes those threads were soaked in blood. The harem had always been a place of tension, whispers, and careful calculation, but during Sultan Ibrahim's reign, that tension turned into terror. The young sultan had grown up in isolation, locked away from the outside world for most of his life. Princes were confined from childhood, educated under strict rules, and raised with constant reminders that betrayal could come from any corner. By the time Ibrahim ascended to the throne, the years of solitude had left him psychologically fragile, suspicious of everyone, and quick to anger. The first months of his rule were a warning. Courtiers noticed how quickly he could shift from charm to cruelty, how small slights or perceived betrayals ignited violent responses. The women of the harem watched in silence, learning the dangerous rhythms of his moods. Even those who had survived previous sultans' whims understood that Ibrahim's unpredictability made every day perilous. The harem, already a machine of hidden power and survival, now teetered on the edge of chaos. One infamous night demonstrated the terrifying consequences of his instability. Accounts from European diplomats describe a scene of horror that seemed almost impossible. Dozens of concubines dragged from their chambers and thrown into a freezing palace fountain. The water, icy and merciless, swallowed silk and flesh alike. Some women drowned immediately. Others disappeared under the waves, their screams muted by the marble walls. The eunuchs carried out these orders without hesitation, loyal to the sultan and to the deadly rules that governed their existence. Outsiders called it a rumor. Historians confirm fragments of it through letters and eyewitness reports. It was not a lie. It was a warning to all who remained. Favor could vanish at any moment, and death could arrive without reason. Fear alone, however, could not halt ambition. Even under Ibrahim's violent temper, some women continued to maneuver, to plot, to protect their futures. They understood the stakes. A single pregnancy could elevate a concubine to unimaginable influence, while failure could lead to obscurity or death. In this environment, strategy was essential. Friendships were alliances, smiles were calculated, and every word carried weight. The harem was not merely a prison, it was a battlefield where the weapons were beauty, intellect, and cunning. Eunuchs became both shields and threats. The chief eunuch, known as the Kislar Agassi, wielded immense power, bridging the gap between the harem and the empire's political elite. He could deliver messages that saved lives or spread rumors that destroyed reputations. Women learned to cultivate his favor, offering secrets or small bribes to secure protection. The eunuchs, in turn, were vigilant, suspicious, and sometimes ruthless. One misstep, one poorly timed favor, could change the balance of power overnight. Inside the palace, every step was observed. Marble floors echoed under careful footsteps, and crystal lamps reflected more than just light. They reflected intentions. Courtyards that seemed serene hid alliances being forged in whispered conversations behind latticed windows. Chambers decorated with gold and velvet held plans of intrigue, secrets exchanged under the soft glow of candlelight. And somewhere above it all, Sultan Ibrahim's moods dictated the rhythm of life, each day potentially deadly. Among the women, tensions simmered. Rivalries were sharper than ever. Older concubines resented newcomers who might capture the sultan's attention. Younger women, desperate to survive, watched their elders closely, seeking weaknesses to exploit. Alliances shifted like shadows, often changing overnight. Trust was a luxury no one could afford. Silence became a survival tool. Some whispered rumors to unsettle rivals. Others spread false information to gain temporary advantages. The entire harem operated like a web, each thread fragile and deadly, where the wrong move could lead to exile or worse. Pregnancy, as always, was the ultimate turning point. A child could bring immense power, but it could also make the mother a target. Conspiracies, hidden poisons, and secret plots were never uncommon. Some women attempt to sabotage rivals through subtle acts of deception, while others relied on eunuchs to manipulate the sultan's attention. Life and death, favor and disfavor, success and failure all depended on a combination of cunning, luck, and timing. The European diplomats who wrote about the palace were fascinated and horrified in equal measure. They recorded the sultan's whims, the disappearances of women, and the invisible power struggles that shaped the empire. For them, the harem was exotic, scandalous, and almost unreal. But beneath the fascination lay a simple truth. The fate of the Ottoman Empire could hinge on the secret dealings inside these gilded walls. A single birth, a single favor, or a single act of betrayal could change the course of history. Despite the terror, some women learned to manipulate the system. Hürrem Sultan, though not yet at her peak, began to understand the mechanics of power. She observed, she calculated, and she waited. Kösem Sultan, who would rise later, also began mastering the rules of survival and influence. These women realized that life inside the harem required a combination of patience, cunning, and ruthlessness. Only those who understood the hidden game could hope to survive, and perhaps even thrive. Meanwhile, Sultan Ibrahim's behavior grew increasingly erratic. Some nights, he delighted in strange rituals, obsessing over scents, fabrics, or meaningless details. Other nights, he erupted in violence, punishing the innocent along with the guilty. The eunuchs carried out his orders without question, enforcing a system of fear that held the harem together. The women lived in constant uncertainty, never knowing when favor might turn to horror, or when whispers in the wrong ears could seal their fate. The contrast between life inside the palace and the world outside was stark. Istanbul thrived, full of colors and sounds and life, unaware of the terror unfolding behind the palace walls. Citizens marveled at the empire's wealth and power, never imagining that their rulers were being shaped by a world of secrets, manipulation, and fear. Outside, life went on as normal. Inside, survival depended on knowledge, alliances, and nerves of steel. The palace walls absorbed every betrayal, every act of courage, and every silent prayer, recording a history invisible to those beyond the gates. And yet, even in the shadow of madness, ambition persisted. The women who survived learned not just to endure, but to influence. They became masters of information, shaping decisions through secrets, letters, and subtle manipulation. The harem was no longer a passive prison. It was a seat of power, where invisible hands directed the fate of princes, viziers, and armies. In this dark world, the fates of entire generations were being written in whispers. The first cracks of madness had appeared, and the harem had begun to reflect them. Sultan Ibrahim's violence, paranoia, and obsession transformed the palace from a place of hidden control into a theater of terror. The women inside adjusted, adapting their strategies to survive the growing chaos. Alliances were tested, rivalries sharpened, and fear became both a weapon and a shield. The golden walls of the harem hid more than beauty. They concealed a fragile balance that could collapse at any moment, reshaping the empire itself.
The harem was no longer merely a place of observation. It had become a battlefield. The walls that once held secrets now echoed with schemes, whispers, and the quiet calculations of women who understood one fundamental truth. Power in the harem meant control over the empire itself. By the time Sultan Ibrahim's erratic rule had fully taken hold, fear had woven itself into every corner of the palace. The concubines knew that a single wrong word, a single misplaced glance, could lead to death. Eunuchs watched everything, their eyes sharp, their loyalty absolute. But even within this web of terror, ambition thrived. Survival depended on knowing the rules, and power favored those who could manipulate them. Among the women who began to rise in influence, two names would come to dominate history: Hürrem Sultan and Kosem Sultan. Both had entered the palace under the weight of anonymity, strangers in a world built on beauty, obedience, and secrecy. Hürrem, clever and observant, quickly understood the harem's rhythms. She cultivated the right alliances, learned which whispers mattered, and recognized which eunuchs could be trusted or used. Kosem, patient and calculating, observed from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to act. Together, their stories would demonstrate how a woman could transform her life and the empire through intelligence, courage, and ambition. But the path to power was perilous. Every rise meant another fall. Rivalries were sharp, often deadly. Older concubines resented the newcomers. Some used hidden poisons, subtle manipulations, or false rumors to sabotage competitors. Others leveraged their proximity to the Sultan to protect themselves while undermining rivals. The harem's rules were clear. Only one woman's son could sit on the throne, and all others had to be removed or destroyed. Pregnancy became the ultimate weapon. A mother's influence depended entirely on her ability to bear a son who survived. Every child was a potential heir. Every cradle was a battlefield. Eunuchs and midwives became part of the silent war. Some facilitated plots to protect favored mothers. Others whispered of betrayals, ensuring that rivals remained vulnerable. Life in the harem was measured in strategies, not days. Every move mattered. Every secret could tilt the balance of power. As Sultan Ibrahim's paranoia grew, so did the stakes. The Sultan's attention was both blessing and curse. Favor brought privileges, gifts, and influence, but it also drew envy. Disfavor brought death. Women learned to anticipate his moods, to interpret his slightest gestures, and to navigate his unstable temper. Nights were particularly dangerous. Some concubines would pray to be chosen by the Sultan, while others prayed not to be called at all. To enter his chambers was to step onto a stage where every action was observed and every misstep could be fatal. The eunuchs were not merely enforcers, they were arbiters of influence. The chief eunuch, Kisler Agassi, held power that rivaled some ministers. He controlled access, information, and secrets. Those who gained his favor could rise quickly, while those who angered him could vanish quietly. Women learned to work through him, offering information, loyalty, or subtle gestures to secure protection. In a palace where survival depended on unseen forces, the eunuchs were both shields and threats. Despite the danger, ambition burned brightly. Hürrem Sultan, ever observant, used every opportunity to gain influence. She spoke carefully, acted strategically, and recognized the importance of the smallest alliances. Every gesture was deliberate, every word calculated. Kosem, meanwhile, waited in the shadows, studying rivalries and alliances, preparing for her own rise. These women were the exception, understanding that the harem's machinery could be used to their advantage. They turned fear into power, strategy into influence, and patience into opportunity. Yet the cost of ambition was always clear. Behind the gilded walls, death was never far away. European diplomats recorded rumors of disappearances, sudden illnesses, and mysterious deaths within the harem. Poisonings, secret plots, and hidden traps were part of daily life. Every rival's fall served as a warning. Power was fragile, and survival demanded constant vigilance. Even a mother's son could become a target, as the succession system was as brutal as it was strategic. Sultan Ibrahim's madness intensified the harem's dangers. Reports tell of nights when he ordered concubines to perform bizarre rituals, insisted on impossible fashions, or punished perceived slights with violence. Dozens of women could vanish in a single night, drowned in fountains, imprisoned, or quietly removed from the palace. Fear became a tool, a language, a rule. Every woman learned to navigate the impossible, balancing submission with cunning, obedience with ambition. Amid this chaos, alliances shifted constantly. A whispered secret here, a bribe there, and fortunes could change. Women worked through eunuchs, servants, and even palace officials to secure their positions. Every move was deliberate. Every favor earned was a step toward survival, and the stakes could not have been higher. The future of the empire, the life of a child, the survival of a mother, all depended on who understood the harem's hidden rules. Yet even in darkness, glimpses of strategy and brilliance emerged. Hurrem Sultan began to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics. She recognized that power came from more than beauty. It came from influence, alliances, and intelligence. Qasim Sultan, observing silently, noted the weaknesses in others, the shifts in the sultan's moods, and the subtle opportunities that appeared only for those patient enough to wait. These women learned to wield fear, loyalty, and ambition as tools, mastering the hidden dynamics that determined life and death. And through it all, Sultan Ibrahim's unpredictability loomed. His actions turned the palace into a stage of terror and intrigue. The harem, which had once been a place of hidden influence, now became a crucible of chaos, where fear and ambition collided violently. Every night could bring a sudden death, every day could bring a small victory, and every decision, no matter how minor, could shape the fate of the empire. The rise of Hurrem and Qasim signaled a new chapter in the harem's history. They demonstrated that even in a world built on terror, intelligence, patience, and ambition could carve a path to influence. Yet for every step they gained, rivals plotted their fall. Every whispered secret could save a life or destroy it. The palace walls held more than gold and silk. They held power, fear, and the invisible threads that controlled the empire itself. And as Istanbul continued to thrive outside the walls, unaware of the battles within, the harem revealed a simple, terrifying truth. In the gilded cage, survival was power, and power was survival. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the first major bloodshed was only a matter of time.
The golden floors of Topkapi Palace had seen decades of ambition, whispers, and careful calculation, but nothing could prepare the harem for the storm that Sultan Ibrahim would unleash. By now, fear had become a constant companion to every woman, every eunuch, and every servant in the palace. The Sultan's moods were volatile, swinging from fleeting kindness to terrifying cruelty. His paranoia had reached its peak, and the slightest perceived betrayal could lead to a deadly consequence. One night, the palace trembled with terror. European diplomats, who chronicled every rumor and glimpse of the Sultan's behavior, wrote with horror about what unfolded. Dozens of concubines, accused without evidence of disloyalty, were dragged from their chambers. Their silk dresses, once a symbol of beauty and luxury, became prison robes, heavy with the cold of the winter night. They were thrown into the freezing water of the palace fountain, their screams muffled by the stone walls. Some sank immediately, while others struggled and vanished silently beneath the ice. The eunuchs carried out the Sultan's orders without hesitation. In that night, power revealed its darkest face. The massacre shocked everyone inside the harem. Survival depended on reading every gesture, anticipating every whim, and understanding the Sultan's unstable mind. Fear became sharper, alliances more fragile, and rivalries deadlier. The women learned quickly. To survive, one had to master the impossible game of perception and manipulation. A misstep could end in exile or worse. Every whisper, every smile, every glance was a calculation. The smallest victory could save a life, and the smallest failure could lead to death. Pregnancy had always been a weapon of influence, but now it became a shield. Women who carried sons gained protection, at least temporarily. Rival mothers watched anxiously, knowing that a child's survival could change the balance of power in an instant. Eunuchs, midwives, and even minor servants became players in this deadly game. Messages were delivered secretly, alliances were forged in shadows, and small acts of sabotage could determine who lived and who died. Life itself had become a strategy, and every action carried consequences far beyond the harem's walls. Sultan Ibrahim's paranoia grew as the women maneuvered. He observed carefully, deciding whom to favor and whom to punish. A smile, a glance, a whispered conversation could mark a woman for death or elevate her to influence. The harem became a stage of terror, where the Sultan's moods dictated not just luxury or punishment, but life or death. Every corridor echoed with careful steps, every chamber became a chessboard, and every shadow hid both danger and opportunity. Amid the chaos, Hurrem Sultan had already learned the rules of survival. She navigated the dangerous currents with intelligence and patience, observing allies and enemies alike. Qasem Sultan, silent but ever watchful, studied every reaction, every change in favor, and every shift in the Sultan's attention. They understood the unspoken truth. The harem was not a place of luxury. It was a battlefield where the empire's fate was silently determined. The women who survived learned to manipulate fear. They cultivated allies among eunuchs, servants, and even minor officials. They delivered information, negotiated favors, and used charm as a weapon. But every victory was temporary. Rivalries never ended. Every woman knew that for one to rise, another often had to fall. And in a palace where survival depended on the Sultan's favor, even temporary power was fraught with danger. The massacre left a scar that could never be erased. The walls, once golden and beautiful, now seemed to absorb the horror within. The silence that followed was more terrifying than screams. The women learned to walk more carefully, speak more cautiously, and trust even less. Fear had become both a weapon and a shield. Survival required constant vigilance. The harem's labyrinth of power had tightened its grip. Outside, Istanbul remained oblivious. Life went on in the markets, in the mosques, and along the bustling streets. Citizens marveled at the empire's grandeur, unaware that the palace's gleaming floors hid horrors beyond imagination. Diplomats recorded fragments of events, often dismissing some as exaggeration, but the truth could not be hidden entirely. The harem controlled the empire's future in ways the city outside could never see. One child's survival, one mother's influence, one whispered secret. These invisible threads shaped history. Hurrem and Qasem understood these threads better than anyone. Each minor victory, each carefully managed alliance, and each strategic silence brought them closer to influence. The massacre had demonstrated the Sultan's terrifying power, but it had also shown the fragility of authority. Even the most powerful could be vulnerable to careful manipulation, careful observation and precise action. The harem, now fully aware of the consequences of misjudgment, became a place of relentless strategy. Every night, women calculated, observed, and maneuvered. Alliances were temporary, rivalries constant, and trust almost non-existent. The palace was alive with tension, a delicate balance of fear, influence, and ambition. The sultan's moods were unpredictable, but for those who understood the rules, the harem was also an arena where power could be seized even from the most dangerous situations. The massacre also reinforced the ultimate rule. Only one woman's son could sit on the throne. All others had to be removed or destroyed. Mothers learned to guard their children fiercely, while rival mothers sought to sabotage their competitors. Every act of care, every whispered secret, and every calculated maneuver could determine the empire's future. Life and death had become inseparable from strategy. Even the eunuchs, feared and powerful, now navigated a world more dangerous than ever. Some used the massacre to consolidate influence, deciding who would survive and who would perish. Others remained loyal, enforcing the sultan's will with unquestioning obedience. Every action, every decision, every favor could tip the balance of power. The harem had transformed from a place of controlled influence to a stage of high-stakes survival. By the following day, the women adjusted. Alliances hardened, rivalries sharpened, and strategies evolved. The massacre was both a warning and an opportunity. Fear was now an instrument, a language, and a tool for those clever enough to wield it. Hiram and Kosum were learning faster than most. They observed, analyzed, and acted with precision. They understood that in the harem, even terror could become a weapon if used wisely. And so, the palace continued its secret life. Outside, Istanbul thrived, unaware of the blood, terror, and silent battles that shaped the empire's fate. Inside, the harem's corridors echoed with whispered plots, quiet victories, and hidden threats. Life was fragile, power was fleeting, and survival demanded constant vigilance. The massacre had changed everything. It had shown the stakes, the rules, and the deadly consequences of miscalculation. And for those who would rise, it was a lesson in the harshest form of politics. In the gilded cage, death was always near, and only the cunning would survive.
The massacre had left the harem trembling, yet the empire endured. Istanbul's streets thrived with life, markets teemed with merchants, and mosques echoed with calls to prayer. To the world outside, the palace seemed untouched, a gleaming symbol of Ottoman grandeur. Yet inside, life had irrevocably changed. The harem, once a place of controlled influence, had become a battlefield where survival, cunning, and ambition defined every action. Women who had survived the Sultan's wrath now understood the rules in ways newcomers could never imagine. Fear had sharpened their minds, and terror had become a tool. Each woman, each mother, each eunuch now played a careful game of observation and calculation. Every smile, every whisper, every gesture was a strategy. The Sultan might dictate life or death, but within the walls of the harem, clever minds could manipulate even him. Among the survivors, Hurrem Sultan began to shine. She had witnessed fear, cruelty, and the brutal limits of power, yet she had also discovered opportunity. The Sultan's attention, fleeting and unpredictable, became a currency she could use. Alliances with eunuchs, whispers to minor officials, and calculated gestures in front of the Sultan turned her from an observer into a player. Hurrem understood a fundamental truth. In the harem, intelligence and patience were as powerful as beauty. Kosum Sultan, silent but vigilant, watched closely.
Every action Hurrem took, every subtle manipulation was a lesson. Qasem learned the importance of timing, the power of observation, and the strength found in patience. Unlike Hurrem, who moved boldly, Qasem waited for the right moment to act, gathering influence quietly while others played the more visible game. Together, these women represented two paths to power, one through bold strategy, the other through careful patience. Pregnancy remained the ultimate weapon. A mother's influence was determined by her ability to bear a son who could survive to ascend the throne. Rival mothers sought to sabotage each other through hidden plots, subtle poisonings, or whispered lies. Eunuchs and midwives became secret allies or threats, depending on loyalty and favor. The stakes were higher than ever. A single child could change the empire's future, elevating a mother to power or dooming her to obscurity. The eunuchs themselves became critical players. The chief eunuch, Kislar Azi, wielded power equal to ministers, controlling access to the sultan and the flow of information. Women who gained his trust could secure protection, influence decisions, and manipulate rivalries. Those who fell out of favor with him could vanish quietly, leaving no trace. The harem's delicate balance had shifted. Fear, influence, and secrecy were the true currencies of power. Amid the terror and strategy, the women began to consolidate influence. Hurrem Sultan, ever calculating, learned to shape decisions indirectly. She managed information, aligned herself with loyal eunuchs, and positioned allies in key roles. Qasem observed silently, cataloging weaknesses and opportunities, waiting for her turn to act, gathering influence quietly while others played the more visible game. Together, these women represented two paths to power, one through bold strategy, the other through careful patience. The massacre had also left scars on the Sultan himself. His paranoia deepened, and his erratic behavior worsened. He became obsessed with threats, real or imagined, and increasingly relied on the harem's women and eunuchs to navigate his reign. This dependency created opportunities. Clever women could guide the Sultan's decisions, shape appointments, and even influence military campaigns indirectly. The harem was no longer merely a private domain. It had become the shadow of the empire's power. Outside observers noticed subtle changes. European diplomats recorded whispers of women influencing appointments, mediating disputes, and managing alliances. The Sultan's decisions were no longer isolated. They reflected the invisible hand of the harem. Fear and strategy had given birth to influence, and influence reshaped the empire. The world outside remained unaware, still marveling at Istanbul's grandeur, oblivious to the invisible empire growing behind the palace walls. Yet power was never guaranteed. Rivalries persisted. Danger remained, and missteps could prove fatal. The harem's women had to balance ambition with caution, observation with action, and patience with timing. Every alliance, every secret, every carefully delivered word could secure survival or doom them. And in this delicate environment, the lessons of terror and survival became the tools of the truly powerful. Hurrem and Qasem exemplified the two faces of influence. Hurrem, bold and strategic, took calculated risks that allowed her to shape decisions openly. Qasem, patient and observant, learned the power of quiet influence, building networks in the shadows, preparing for the moment when she could assert her authority. Together, their stories revealed a truth few outside the harem understood. Power did not always come from the throne. It often came from the shadows behind it. The consolidation of female power transformed the harem from a gilded prison into a seat of hidden authority. Women became masters of information, manipulators of loyalty, and arbiters of life and death. They could determine the fate of princes, influence the appointments of viziers, and even guide military campaigns indirectly. The empire, so vast and powerful, rested on decisions made behind latticed windows and velvet curtains. As Istanbul continued to thrive outside, the harem's women operated in silence. Every night, every corridor, every room became a theater of strategy. Alliances shifted, rivalries intensified, and the smallest victories carried enormous consequences. Fear remained, but ambition thrived alongside it. Those who survived the Sultan's wrath and mastered the rules of the harem became invisible rulers, shaping history without ever leaving the palace walls. The harem's story was no longer one of mere survival. It had become a story of hidden authority, silent battles, and the invisible hands that shaped history itself.
By now, the harem had transformed into something far beyond its original purpose. What began as a carefully controlled space for the Sultan's women had evolved into the empire's hidden engine of power. Its walls, latticed windows, and marble corridors concealed ambition, strategy, and influence that shaped the fate of millions. Istanbul outside remained vibrant and bustling, its citizens unaware that the empire's real power often lay behind curtains and behind the whispers of women who had learned to survive and dominate in a world built on fear. The lessons of terror and survival were never forgotten. Women who had witnessed massacres, disappearances, and the Sultan's madness understood that the harem demanded more than beauty. It demanded cunning, intelligence, patience, and an iron will. Hürrem Sultan and Kösem Sultan had risen above most because they had mastered the invisible rules. Their influence reached beyond the palace walls, shaping decisions that affected armies, trade, and the empire itself. Yet their victories came at enormous personal cost. Every step forward meant another woman fell, another child lost, another alliance shattered. Hürrem Sultan became a master strategist. She influenced the Sultan, negotiated with officials, and protected her children with careful precision. Every move was deliberate, every favor earned a shield, and every whisper a weapon. Kösem, patient and calculating, waited for the right moments, building networks of loyalty and knowledge. Together, they proved that power could thrive even under the most dangerous circumstances. They were women who understood that influence, once invisible, could change the course of history. But the harem's shadows were not free from tragedy. The very system that elevated some women destroyed others. Mothers who failed to produce heirs, rivals who miscalculated, and innocent children became victims of the empire's brutal succession rules. Princes were often confined, rivals eliminated, and children raised in isolation, their minds shaped by suspicion and fear. Every victory was balanced by loss, and every triumph came at a cost measured in lives, tears, and invisible scars. The eunuchs remained indispensable. Their power grew with each passing year, controlling access, information, and loyalty. Some became kingmakers in their own right, while others acted as loyal enforcers of the Sultan's will. Their presence reinforced the harem's control, but also added complexity. Alliances and betrayals intertwined across layers of hierarchy, creating a delicate balance where the fate of the empire could hinge on a single whispered message or a strategically delivered secret. Despite this invisible power, the empire outside faced real challenges. Military campaigns faltered, borders were contested, and cities sometimes resisted Ottoman authority. Historians would later see a connection between the palace's internal chaos and the empire's gradual weakening.
While women in the harem navigated survival and influence, the sultan's erratic rule sometimes left decisions to chance, further destabilizing the state. The palace and the empire, though connected, were at times in dangerous imbalance. Even after Sultan Ibrahim's removal, the harem retained its influence. Qasem Sultan rose to unprecedented power, ruling as regent for her young son and later her grandson. She controlled decisions at the highest level, directing ministers, guiding armies, and shaping alliances. Yet even she could not escape the cycle of ambition and betrayal. The same walls that had nurtured her power also consumed her eventually. She was strangled in her own chamber, killed by the same tools she had once used to protect her family and destroy rivals. The harem had elevated her to heights few could imagine, but it demanded its price. The legacy of the harem extended beyond individual stories. It demonstrated that power could be wielded from the shadows, that survival required intelligence and cunning, and that influence often depended on understanding hidden systems. It was both a crucible and a laboratory, where women learned the impossible rules of life, death, and authority. The harem shaped the empire, and the empire's challenges reflected the complexities hidden within its walls. Yet, for all its terror and influence, the harem also left a silent inheritance, the normalization of suffering as a tool of power. Generations of women learned that obedience, secrecy, and sacrifice were essential for survival. Every step forward required compromise, every victory demanded vigilance, and every alliance was tentative. The palace's gilded walls concealed lessons of fear, resilience, and the human cost of ambition. Today, the harem no longer functions as a political engine. Its halls are museum rooms, its doors open to visitors who admire mosaics, fountains, and gilded windows. Tourists photograph the beauty, marvel at the luxury, and smile in sunlit courtyards. Yet beneath those stones, history whispers. Countless lives shaped, destroyed, or erased remain part of the harem's hidden story. Its true legacy lies not in artifacts, but in the lives that once moved within it. The women, the children, the eunuchs, and the unseen struggles that directed the empire. The story of the Ottoman harem is not just a tale of beauty or decadence. It is a story of power, fear, survival, and human resilience. It reveals how empires can be influenced from hidden spaces, how ambition can thrive in silence, and how the lives of ordinary and extraordinary women alike can shape history. It is a warning. Where power is concentrated behind closed doors, the human cost is often invisible, and suffering can become tradition. As one walks through the museum halls today, it is easy to see only grandeur. The marble, the mosaics, and the gardens tell a story of wealth and artistry. But for those who pause, who imagine the whispers behind latticed windows, the faint echo of footsteps, or the tears that once dissolved into palace walls, the harem's deeper story emerges. It is a story of life and death, ambition and terror, cunning and tragedy. It is a story of the empire's shadow, where history was shaped in silence and survival itself became power. The Ottoman harem teaches a timeless truth, that power, no matter how grand or hidden, always carries consequences. The lives of those within its walls were shaped by fear, intelligence, and unyielding ambition. Every rise demanded sacrifice, every influence demanded secrecy, and every decision carried weight far beyond what could be seen. This hidden world reminds us that history is rarely written by what is visible. It is written in whispers, shadows, and the lives of those who survive, adapt, and endure. The legacy of the harem endures. Its women shaped sultans, guided empires, and survived where others perished. Its stones are silent, its halls are still, but the stories of cunning, resilience, and ambition echo through time. The empire outside may have grown and declined, but the harem's lessons remain. Power, when concentrated and hidden, can shape nations, consume lives, and leave a shadow that endures far longer than gold, silk, or stone.